Hey guys, from Steph to you, bringing you my UFC 188 fantasy picks and also just my fight predictions on the overall bout. First off, I just wanted to apologize. Haven't had time to make the video, but so it's coming out a little bit late this time. But we'll be sure to get the next one out in plenty of time for you guys to do your fantasy picks and what have you. I don't know if you guys are aware the Tumanov and Todd Hunter bout had been canceled yesterday, so it looks like the first bout on the prelim card is going to be the Benitez Collier fight, and I'm going to talk about that one. Again, remember that the picks that I make aren't always necessarily who I think are going to win. I'm also gearing this somewhat towards the DraftKings fantasy, so some guys, they might not necessarily be the favorite, but if they have a high finish rate or if they've never been knocked out, they might be able to score you some points. And so just keep that in mind, because there's been some questions about if I really think these guys are going to win or not. Also, I was able to call the Ben Rothwell and Dan Henderson fights in the last week's fight. So sometimes it just varies. But anyway, let's get started. The first fight, Gabriel Benitez versus Clay Collier. Benitez coming in 17-4. He's 5'9". He's got 15 finishes, 9 submissions. He's never been knocked out. He did win his, I think it was a third round submission in his debut against Morrison. He's, pretty good fighter. I rewatched some tape on him again. Some of these prelim guys, they've only fought a few times in the UFC, and so I have done my research and watched them. But he's going up against a pretty tough opponent. Clay Collier coming in 14-5. He's got 10 finishes, 8 knockouts. He's 500 in the UFC so far. He's 1-1. I see with him there are some holes in his game, especially when it comes to the ground. He hasn't really been there. So with the 9 submissions that Benitez has, he might be able to get you a nice submission. With the price at $11,200 on DraftKings, I think Collier's a little bit overpriced for someone that hasn't really, he did just lose his last fight against Max Holloway. He was knocked out, so I wouldn't take him as far as a fantasy pick. He probably will win this fight, but I wouldn't take it for fantasy. Look at Benitez if you're looking for a low-end flyer. He might be able to give you some pretty good, a pretty nice finish if it goes to the ground. Next up, we have Augusto Montano versus Cathal Pedred. Now, Pedred comes in at 16-2. These are pretty tall guys for the welterweight division at 6'2". They're both 6'2". Pedred comes in. He's got 7 finishes, 6 knockouts, and 9 decisions. The 9 decisions has me a little hesitant to take him for a fantasy pick because a lot of his wins have gone the distance, and as you guys know, that doesn't always equate points. He is 3-0 in the UFC, has 2 decisions and one submission win. But the guy he's going against, Montano, he is a very, very good fighter. He hasn't not necessarily fought, a lot of top tier guys, but I watched a lot of film on him. Coming in at 15-1, he's got 15 finishes, 10 knockouts, and 5 submissions. So he has finished every fight he's been in. Again, he hasn't fought UFC talent before, but when you've got that kind of power and you're fighting in a home, not hometown, but a home environment, I would look for him to do very well. He did have a decision loss in his UFC debut, but again, he at least your senior debut, he didn't get knocked out or anything. You could maybe chalk it up to nerves or whatever, but I would take Montano as a lock. Really, I would take him for fantasy as a lock, and I do think he'll win this fight. Look at that one. The next fight we have Francisco Trevino and Johnny Chase. Now, these are some guys that I did quite a bit of research on as well, and one thing I can tell you is Trevino, he's got 4 wins of submission, 4 wins of knockouts, and 4 wins by decision. He did lose a decision in his debut against Rene Forte, I believe it was, but he's never really shown, from what I've seen, he's never really shown that he's, you know, mastered any one. He's not a submission artist. He's not a knockout artist. He's just an all-around fighter. But the guy he's going against, I just think this is a bad matchup for Trevino. He's going against Johnny Chase. He's coming in at 20-4. He's 6'1", so he's 2 inches taller. He's got 18 finishes, 12 knockouts, 6 submissions. He hasn't lost in 5 years. I really think that Johnny Chase will come out, and he's priced pretty high at 11,300. But I do think that he'll get you some good value. So take Johnny Chase in this one. The next up, you have in the bantamweight, we have Alejandro Perez and Patrick Williams. I hadn't really seen too much on Patrick Williams, to be honest. He's one of the fighters I had to do some research. I usually take a couple hours before I do a video to look at the different fighters and research them a bit. But with Perez, he comes in at 15-5. He's got 11 finishes, 6 KOs, 5 submissions. He did win his. Now, he won his debut against Jose Quinones, but he lost back in 2013, not in the UFC, in another organization, to Quinones. It wasn't really the most exciting fight, but he's going up against Patrick Williams. Now, Patrick Williams, he's coming in, he's 7-4. He's got 6 finishes, 4 knockouts out of those, 2 subs. He has been finished 3 times, though. And he was just KO'd in his debut by Chris Beal, and I mean, it's kind of one of those guys where he does have a very high, finish rate. He doesn't have as many fights. I mean, again, coming in at 7-4, you've lost about a third of your fights. So I would take Alejandro Perez in this one, but again, for a fantasy point, I wouldn't really stay towards any of these guys really heavy because I don't really see this one being finished. So that's my pick on that one. Next up in the lightweight division, we have Efrain Escudero versus Drew Dober. This is going to be a pretty big fight. I mean, as you know, Efrain Escudero, he's been in and out of the UFC since 2009. He was here, he lost, went to other organizations, Bellator and stuff, came back, and now he's 1-1 in his last 2 fights where he's come back to the UFC. He's got 14 finishes, coming at 23-9, 12 submissions. The one thing I do like about him is he's never been knocked out. He is going up against a pretty tough fighter, though. Drew Dober, I saw his last fight, and luckily he did get overturned to a no contest, but he got absolutely robbed against Leandro Silva with that submission stoppage. But he's coming in at 15-6, 11 finishes, 9 submissions. He does have 2 knockouts, but he's not really going to have knockout power. But I do think this would be a really good ground match. Both these guys can do submissions. And at the pricing, Dober's coming in at 10,400. I would actually lean towards him. I think he's the stronger fighter. As I said, he's fought some pretty tough guys. He actually submitted Jamie Varner not too long ago, and I would definitely take Drew Dober in this fight. After that, we have the flyweight division. That is Henry. I hope I'm saying this. Henry Cejudo and Chico Camus. And with Cejudo, I would you look at his record: 8-0, 4 finishes, 3 knockouts. For the flyweight division to have knockouts, it's really not the forte for those guys. Those guys are usually sub guys or speed guys. They're not really going to knock a bunch of people out. So that's one thing. He's 2-0 in the UFC, and you got Camus, who's 14-5. He's got 7 finishes to his record. He did beat Brad Pickett in a kind of controversial split decision in his last fight. So I mean, again, as a flyer, if you're looking just if you stack your lineup with a lot of expensive guys and you want to take Camus as a low end, possibly. You might want to take him for that. I would not take Cejudo though for the price. He's the most expensive fighter, 11,900. I do think he'll win the fight, but again, at that price, I mean, I would want a first round knockout, and I don't think he's going to do that. So now we go to the main card. The main card, we're starting off in the women's strawweight. We have Tecia Torres and Angela Hill. Now here's the thing about Torres. She is 5-0. and she's being brought up, to kind of like star for that strawweight division. But all of her wins have been, decisions. So from a fantasy standpoint, I would not look at her. When you look at Angela Hill, she only has two fights. I did watch one of them. She had some knockout power with her knees. Again, if you're looking for a cheap fighter that might be able to kind of like a Hail Mary knockout or because when you got fighters that have 5 fights versus 2 fights, you're not looking at, there's not so much you can go on, because anybody kind of looks good against lower end competition. And also you have to remember that fighters get better, they evolve, they learn more things. So I would stay with Torres just off of the record alone. She's fought more fights, and she's kind of almost being, I guess you could say, groomed. So I would stay towards her. But again, Hill does have a knockout. If you're desperate, I guess you could look at her. So next up we have Yair Rodríguez versus Charles Rosa. This is an interesting fight. I liked watching a lot of Rosa's film that I got to see on him. He comes in at 10-1. He's finished every fighter he's ever fought, or that he's won. He's finished every fighter. 7 submissions, 3 knockouts. He's never been finished. He's had 1 decision loss against Dennis Seaver, and I would definitely take him in this fight. Rodriguez comes in, only 5 fights, 2 decisions, 1 knockout, 1 submission. I watched a little bit of his film. Looks like he's kind of still a work in progress, I would say, just from my opinion. So, take that for what you will, but I would definitely take Rosa in this fight. Next up, and this is my pick of the night, Kelvin Gastelum versus Nate Marquardt. Kelvin Gastelum, I think, is just an absolute train of a guy. He's, coming up he was at middleweight, he went down to welterweight, coming back up to middleweight. He's fighting Nate Marquardt, who is kind of a shell of his former self. I think Kelvin Gastelum is going to do very well in this fight. Gastelum comes in 10-1. He did have a split decision loss to Tyron Woodley, but again, that was kind of a controversial thing in my opinion. He's beat guys like Uriah Hall, Jake Ellenberger. He's beat a lot of guys already. Very young, 23 years old. He's got power. Very good wrestler. I would definitely take Kelvin Gastelum. That's my pick of the night. Take him to the bank. He's going to win this fight. Nate Marquardt comes in 33-14. He's lost. He's lost so many of his last fights. I believe he's lost. I think he's 1-4 in his last 5. He's just really not where he used to be. He tried going down to welterweight and had some success there, weighing back up, but he just doesn't really have it anymore. I think he's going to be easy pickings for Gastelum, but definitely take him. Next up in the lightweight division, we have Gilbert Melendez versus Eddie Alvarez. Now, this fight, this is a tough one, because Eddie Alvarez in his last fight against Donald Cerrone looked very impressive. I thought that he was able to catch Cerrone with some pretty good shots, whereas Melendez, we all know he was a champion over there with Strikeforce. When he's lost, he's only lost to the best. And you look at Melendez, 22-4, 12 finishes, 11 knockouts, 1 submission. He's never been knocked out. I think he has 1 submission loss, I believe, and 3 decisions. He did just come off a loss against Anthony Pettis, but again, you lost to the champion. It's not like he lost to some nobody. Eddie Alvarez hasn't fought really that much in the UFC, and he didn't win. He didn't beat Donald Cerrone, but he did go to 3 rounds with him. He's 25-4. But again, I would take him as a flyer. I know that Melendez has never been knocked out, but Alvarez's boxing is something just on another level. He's got 14 knockouts, 7 submissions. Again, I picked Melendez in this fight, but I would not be surprised if Alvarez's boxing actually gets him a knockout in this one. So if you're looking from a fantasy point, he's coming in at 9,100 on DraftKings. You might want to take a look at him as a potential knockout. Even though I know Melendez hasn't been knocked out, his boxing is just that good. And then the last fight is the UFC heavyweight championship fight. Now, I know a lot of people are looking forward to the return of Cain Velasquez. I will say I'm not completely on board with Cain Velasquez. It's not because of lack of talent or anything like that, but when someone is off as often as he is, you know, he's had the title now going on 5 years, and he's only fought 5 times. He hasn't fought in a year and a half. You know, now the good thing you can say about Cain Velasquez is he's only lost to Junior Dos Santos, and that was kind of a, I don't want to say a lucky punch, but when you get hit in the ear, you know, you lose your equilibrium and you go down. So there's nothing that says that he's gonna lose. It'd be easy for me to just pick Cain Velasquez because he's the champion. He's got great wrestling. But here's the thing: I'm actually gonna go with Fabrício Werdum, and for a fantasy standpoint, I would look at Fabrício Werdum because I believe my favorite fighter is Frank Mir, but I think Fabrício Werdum has the best jiu-jitsu in the heavyweight division ever. He's just on a whole other level. He's coming in. He's the taller fighter. And his striking has improved so much. It's really ridiculous. What he did to Travis Brown, what he just did to Mark Hunt. I mean, he is really stepped it up with the striking. And remember, if Cain wants to take this to the ground, Fabrício will be more than happy. I mean, remember what he did to Fedor? He was the first guy to really beat Fedor. Before Bigfoot Silva, before Dan Henderson, he submitted Fedor, and so that's the best heavyweight champion of all time. I really do think that he can win this fight, and I'm actually going to pick Fabrício Werdum to win this fight. And from a fantasy standpoint, 7,500 for it should. He should be worth way more than that. He's got the knockout power. He got the submission power. His takedown defense is pretty good. And even if he gets taken down, that's fine because Cain hasn't really been in there, with the exception of Nogueira. He hasn't really been in there with any jiu-jitsu masters. Cain Velasquez. He beat Brock Lesnar, an inexperienced fighter. He fought Junior Dos Santos 3 times, and Junior Dos Santos doesn't really have a ground game. So he doesn't really have too many fighters that he's fought, and he's also beaten like Czech Congo and Ben Rothwell. Again, no one with submissions really. So I think that my prediction would be a second or third round. I wouldn't say fourth or fifth, just because the later it gets into the fight, more it's going to go towards Cain Velasquez. Plus, when the fighters are sweatier and bloodier, it's harder to get submissions. But I would definitely take Fabrício Werdum, and I think he will be the heavyweight champion. So I hope you guys win some money. We did very well in the last video. So subscribe, like. This was From Steph to you, and we'll see you guys.